Parshas Shelach, we're interested in chidushim, insights, and Rabbi Simcha is full of them. Let's open up to Perek Yud Gimel, and in this case, we'll look at Pasuk Yud Aleph. The Torah says, "Lemate Yosef, lemate Menashe," and gives you the name. We have now a representative of Shevet Yosef, and in this case, the branch called Menashe. And we already have in Shevet Yosef two representatives, because we have not only a fellow by the name of Menashe, of Gadi ben Susi, which is in our pasuk, but if you go back 2 psukim earlier, Matei Ephraim, Hoshea ben Nun. So Meir Simcha, in the second paragraph in Parshas Shelach, asks by implication 2 questions. Number one, why does Yosef, of all the Shvatim, have 2 representatives? And secondly, if each one is a Shevet unto himself, we have Shevet Ephraim and Shevet Menashe. All told, we have 12, although Levi is not represented here. So then the question is, why does the Torah mention Yosef's name at all? Lemate Yosef. And Rabbi Simcha, in answering the question as to why there are 2 representatives of Yosef and why Menashe gets represented here, wouldn't it be enough if Ephraim was represented? He says the following. Moshe already anticipated what's going to come down the line. And that is that Mata Menashe would be separated and split into 2 parts. Chetzio, be Aver Yarden. So half of the Shevet would not cross the Yarden and go westward. They would remain on the eastern side of the Jordan River. V'chetzio, and the other half would go ba'aretz. Now, which one of these 2 halves was represented here in the Meraglim, and why? Says Rabbi Simcha, again, this is purely original. Moshe Rabbeinu understood that he would have to send a representative of that half of Shevet Menashe that would inherit the land of Israel, that would insist that although the other half of their own Shevet would remain in Ever Yarden, which although maybe is part of the greater land of Israel, but it's not the pinnacle of Eretz Yisrael, because, for example, without going into details here, but the mitzvah Tzliyus Haaretz might only apply after you cross the Jordan to the western side of the Jordan. And half of Shevet Menashe said, you know what? Very nice. On this side of the river, Transjordan, there are very nice grazing areas and so forth and so on. And our brethren here want to take that land and inherit it. We want to cross the Yarden. We want our chelik in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael. They had a tremendous love for the land of Israel. Says Rabbi Simcha, Moshe Rabbeinu could not leave them out. He felt that they had to be represented because of their love for Eretz Yisrael. And perhaps what Rameh Simcha has in mind, I'm just suggesting, is that when Moshe Rabbeinu realized, based on his Ruach HaKodesh, that half of Shevet Menashe has such a tremendous trukah, tremendous craving and love for Eretz Yisrael, he said, let me cut my losses here. Let me improve the statistical probabilities that the report that the people would give would be a positive report. He, in a sense, put his eggs into the basket of half of Shevet Menashe, who could have easily stayed on the other side of Eretz Yisrael with the other half of the Shevet, but they insisted, no, we want to go into Eretz Yisrael. We love Eretz Yisrael. This half of Shevet Menashe is going to play a major role here with the Meraglim. This is the group that I want to be sure to be represented here amongst the Meraglim. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu felt that they would surely bring back a good report, and not only that, if any of the others were going the opposite direction, these members of Shevet Menashe, that half that would cross the Yarden, they would tip the scale, they would have the influence like Kalev and Yoshua tried to do. And now Rabbi Simcha asks the following question, by implication again. What motivated the people of that half of Shevet Menashe to love the land of Israel so much? And Rabbi Simcha says it was in their blood. Why? Where did they inherit it from? From Yosef. He says this was the midah of Yosef, Shechibev Eretz Yisrael. Of all the Shvatim, Yosef stands out as the one Shevet, or shall I say, one of the Shiftei Kah, meaning one of the 12 sons of Yaakov who loves Eretz Yisrael. As the Medrash says, when Yosef appears in front of the Mitzrim, he says, Ganov Gunavti mi Eretz HaIvrim. Chazal tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu was called a Mitzri by the Bnos Yisro, and he said nothing. They identified him as a Mitzri, and he was quiet. And therefore, he's not going to enter into the land. But Yosef, Ganov Guvnafti Meretz Ivrim, he's proud to identify himself with the land of Israel. Not only that, before he dies, he gives the last will and testament, Halesim es atzmosem izeh. I want to be buried in the land of Israel. So that it's not enough to have one representative of Yosef going into the land of Israel, but because of Yosef's great love for Eretz Yisrael, two representatives, two sub-shvatim, if we could call them that, would be represented in the group of those who are sent to scout out the land. And that would be both Ephraim, his representative, and Menashe. And secondly, why is Menashe singled out? And the answer is because the love for Eretz Yisrael was demonstrated by this half of Shevet Menashe when they were willing to give up on the very fertile land that was outside the bounds of Eretz Yisrael proper in order to guarantee themselves an inheritance in the land. And now Rabbi Simcha closes this by presentation by adding 4 words. Bechol zeh lo hoya. Imagine Yosef's love for Eretz Yisrael, which is bequeathed to his children, and Menashe, in the half that will cross the Yarden, demonstrates their tremendous love for the land of Israel. And nevertheless, all this seemingly in the bud, in the basket, that there's no question that the report is going to be positive. It didn't happen. And at this point, Rabbi Simcha leaves us hanging on the question of what was the sin of the Meraglim and why was it so powerful? Why were they so overwhelmed with fear to such an extent that all the love for Eretz Yisrael in Shevet Yosef and in that half of Shevet Menashe, it was not enough to counterbalance the overwhelming fear that led them to give such a negative prognosis about Eretz Yisrael. That question remains unanswered. Rabbeinu Bechaye adds another piece here. Again, he's way before Rabbeinu Simcha, of course. And he wants to know if Ephraim and Menashe are two Shvatim, two out of the 12 representatives. Why did the Torah have to mention Lemate Yosef? Leave out Yosef's name. And Rabbeinu Bechaye says something amazing. And that is that Yosef was guilty for Dibur Ra when he spoke Lashon Hara about his brothers and brought that to Father Jacob. And therefore, he's mentioned here in the context of the Dibur Ra of the Meraglim. And if we have time later, I'd like to make a parallel between the Dibur Ra of Yosef, not appreciating as he should have his brothers, and the Dibur Ra of the Meraglim, not appreciating the land of Israel. I'm going to go on and add one or two more pieces, and then I want to hear your questions. Vayikra Moshe Loshea ben Nun Yoshua. Rashi quotes the famous Chazal. Why is it that at this juncture, Moshe Rabbeinu changes the name of Yoshua from Hosea to Yoshua with a prayer? Now that Hosea has two letters that form the name of God, the Yud added to the Hey, Yud K, Yoshiacha me'atzas merag. And again, by implication, I work very hard on this to always try in every little shtickle of Rabbi Simcha's Chiddush to try to figure out what bothers him. He doesn't spell out his questions like Rashi does. But I think what's bothering him, if I could read between the lines, is of all the different Meraglim, why was it so critical? Why was it first on Moshe Rabbeinu's list to pray on behalf of Yoshua? Why is Yoshua singled out that he needs the prayer? In Mirza Hashem, Shabbos morning, I have a shir in the LC based on Rav Soloveitchik's insights, and the Rav has a very interesting answer to that question. But let's take a look at Rameir Simcha's original approach. The Gemara in Sota tells us that part of the fear of the Meraglim was Amalek. As the Pasuk says, we'll see it soon, Amalek Yoshev B'Eretz HaNegev. Which one of the members of the Jewish community could be singled out as the military commander who could defeat Amalek? It's got to be Yoshua. Because in the very first battle, when Amalek attacked the Jewish people when they left Mitzrayim, it was Yoshua who led the battle. Now, the Meraglim coming into the land and seeing Amalek and all the other forces and adversaries that were very mighty and powerful. Imagine, says Rameir Simcha, what would be if, heaven forbid, Yoshua would fall prey to the same temptations as the other Meraglim, or perhaps be influenced by them. And he would come forward with a negative response of lo nuchal, that we cannot defeat these enemies. Says Rameir Simcha, imhu yirape yoda, if he will raise his hands and say they're formidable enemies, they're impossible, then halo tove tikva, we have no hope for any success. The people will say, look, even Yoshua, the great military commander who defeated Amalek, even he is willing to throw in the towel. Yiro ha'am shachrei milchemes Amalek v'ameraglim omrim Amalek Yosef Eretz HaNegev Yorei Moshe shem yishmu me'alochem milchemes Amalek. If they would hear from the very warrior who defeated Amalek in the past, shehu merape es yodo, what an impact it would have on the rest of the Meraglim, and for sure on the rest of Klal. An amazing Kiddush of Rameir Simcha, if we only appreciate how deep of a thinker he was, understanding the psychology of the Meraglim and how the very sensitive piece of the puzzle was, where would Yoshua be? If Yoshua would give up hope, then the whole enterprise is an absolute loss. We go on now, and after this we'll stop to Pasuk Lamed. And once again, Rabbi Simcha realizes that there's an extra phrase here in this pasuk that's totally superfluous, and at the surface of it is totally meaningless. So we're going to fast forward now to pasuk Lamed in this same chapter. I'm going to read the pasuk for pedagogical reasons and deliberately omit two words, Hashem Yislach, because I want to show you how these two words are, at the face of it, totally superfluous. Vayas kolev es ha'am, vayomer, olo na'aleh, v'yarashnu oso ki yachol nuchal lo. Now imagine the scene. 10 spies have just reported about the fortified cities, about the warriors, about the giants, about Eretz Ocheles Yoshveha, a land that consumes its people. And they've already given the prognosis. We have no chance for success. And Kalev, when I think of Kalev here, and I hope no one will misunderstand me, I'm not saying something pejorative about falafels, but my son, by the way, is about to get a falafel. Anyway, so you have the great commanders, So Yoshua is quiet. And Kalev gets up and he says, Alo na'aleh, ki arashnu. So again, against all odds, against all the other reports of the Meraglim, ki yachol nuchal. And I would have said, if I was there, to Kalev, big shot. Rabbi Simcha is going to present an original thesis that will answer 3 questions. Question number 1. Let's read the pasuk again with the 2 words that I omitted, because as I read it, it was a perfectly complete pasuk. Vayas kolev es ha'am el Moshe. What's El Moshe doing over here? 2 words that easily could have been left out. Question number 2. Isn't it a little bit of a chutzpah on the part of Kalev to say, Olo na'aleh, we can do it, and then to add the words, Ki yachol nuchal, mi samcha, with all due respect. And the 3rd question I think Rabbi Simcha wants to ask is, why does Yoshua remain silent? Why is it that these 2 Meraglim, who seem to be chavrusa here, they seem to be a partnership in defending the original plan to go into the promised land, only one of them is willing to come forward and say, Hinuchal, where was Yoshua? Says Rabbi Simcha, ha'inyan, again without asking any of the questions. Dehema hayu mispachad. What was it that planted the seed of fear into the hearts of the Meraglim? Of course, you and I would have said, without Rabbi Simcha, it was their awareness of the adversaries, the fortifications, of the impossibility, statistically, of succeeding in a military campaign. Says Rabbi Simcha, no. We have to turn the clock back to Parshas Balos, the parsha of Eldad Umeda. And the pasuk says, Misnabim, and they were prophesizing. The Torsh B'Tzav conceals the substance of their prophecy, but Torsh Baal Peh reveals it. And Moshe makes. Moshe is going to die. He will not lead us into the promised land. And the people realize that Moshe Rabbeinu himself has no objection. He doesn't raise a voice of protest. Apparently, their nevuah is a true nevuah, a genuine prophecy, and it's going to become reality. And this is what's going to just send off a spark of fear, red belts. Moshe is going to die. Im Kain, likanes, the Eretz Mivtza, to go into this fortified land, lilachem im Amalek, and to fight against Amalek. You may remember the Mapilim, they tried to climb up and fight against Amalek, and they were defeated. Our track record is not great. Anakim, there are giants in the land, and we are like little grasshoppers. Below Moshe, that's already too much. That's what we call in Hilchot Shabbos the Makeh B'Patish. With all these challenges and impossible adversaries, to overcome these adversaries. On top of that, Moshe is going to die. Without Moshe, halo yiplu kulam lefi charef. We don't have a chance to succeed. Every last one of us will be killed by the sword. And here, we begin to understand the role of Kalev, his attempt to quiet them down and give them confidence. And this is the El Moshe, those two extra words in the pasuk. Says Rabbi Simcha, Lachein hishti Kalev es ha'am, because the Am believed that all of the Mofsim, all of the great miracles came through Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was not just the intermediary. He was not just the conduit, but that he was the generator of that force of miracles. Comes along Kalev, and he says, no. You're making a big, fundamental, almost philosophical mistake about one of the tenets of our faith. Adarab, you should know. Gdulaso toli bachem. Moshe Rabbeinu has no independent greatness. His greatness comes from you. You, the people of Israel, are great. And you invest Moshe Rabbeinu in greatness. And no doubt, Rabbi Meir Simcha has in mind the famous Chazal, when Moshe is up on the mountain, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, raid kishiches amcha, raid, says Chazal, go down the mountain, raid migdulascha. And Chazal say that, what is your gedula, Moshe Rabbeinu? Your gedula is that of the people. If they're down, then you're down. If they're worthless, Chas v'sholom, then you too. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't get nevuah during most of the period in the Midbar. Why? Because Klal Yisrael were nizufim, they were excluded, and therefore Moshe was excluded. Moshe is not independent. Olo Nale, what was the message of Kalev? Olo Nale, biatzmeinu, below Moshe. Even if the nevuah is a true nevuah, and even if Eldad who made that have spilled the beans, that Moshe will die here in the sand dunes of the wilderness, and he will not enter the promised land. Olo Nale, biatzmeinu. We are the source of power. We are the source of kedusha, of sanctity. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings about miracles for the people of Israel. Ein Moshe siba eitzel Hashem lanhoga nisit. Moshe is not the cause of the divine, miraculous providence and miracles. Ha'uma ha'Yisraelis, a phrase that appears over and over again in Rabbi Meir Simcha, the atzma, he ru'uya lashgach elokis hapratis, v'zeu ki yachol nale nuchalo. You have to add a few words. There's a carrot here. Before the words El Moshe, add the words Bameshem Yachasim Hakol El Moshe. Vayasam El Moshe, about Moshe, concerning Moshe. You're in a state of fear. Why? Because you attribute all the great miracles to Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the one who generated those miracles. You're making a mistake. Moshe's greatness emanates from God, from the people. And therefore, Olo Nala, says Rabbi Simcha, Kolev was not being a Balgaiva, he was not being bold and brazen, he was not a big shot. On the contrary, he was telling the people of Israel that you are big shots, you are the Am Segula, it's for you that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about all the miracles, and Moshe Rabbeinu was a conduit, but it's all you. And now Rabbi Simcha quotes a pasuk at the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, when Yoshua turns to the people to try to give them this orus, the encouragement. Vayomer Yoshua bezos tedun ki kel chai bekirbechem v'horish yorish. You should know God is amongst us, and He will bequeath the land. We will succeed in conquering the land because God is with us. Kel chai bekirbechem. And what was Yoshua trying to do at this point? He was calming down the people. Don't make a mistake. Moshe, when Moshe's Bekir B'chem, V'hu Asa Lachem is called Gdulos, then we can conquer the land. Raki Elokim Bekir Benu. God is with us. He's the Kel Chai. He's eternally the living God. Below Moshe Shekvar Mes. Moshe has already departed. However, says Rabbi Simcha, at this point here in Parshas Shelach, when the Meraglim come back with their report and Kolev is going to tell us, well, you know what? We're going to conquer the land. That's not something that Yoshua could have said. Because if Yoshua would have made that statement, then Hayu Omrim, the people would have said, L'kavad Atzmo Hu Dorish. Yoshua is the second half of the Nevuah of Eldad Umeidad. Eldad Umeidad said two things. Number one, they said Moshe Meis, and number two, they said Yoshua Machnisis Haaretz, Machnison La'aretz. So Yoshua is the big shot, a low nala. I'm going to be the military giant. They would say L'kavad Atzmo Hu Dorish. And therefore Yoshua had to take a back seat, and Kolev was the one to come forward and comfort the people and teach them, don't be miyaches, don't relate and attribute all the miracles to Moshe. And here in the second paragraph in this presentation, Rabbi Simcha says that the dibur, the nevuah that was conveyed to Eldad Umeidad, was a personal nevuah. There are two categories of nevuah. There's one nevuah in which the Navi is meant to transmit the nevuah to the people, and sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals to a Navi something that's private. It's direct for the Navi. He's not asked or commanded to share it with others. And the difference is that if a Navi is commanded to share it with others, then Eina Nevuah Choseres. And that nevuah will definitely come to realization and fruition. But in the case of a private nevuah, it may or may not come to fruition. So Rabbi Simcha says that Yidmu be'emes ki hu bi'atzmo Eloki. He says that, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Eldad Umeidad, reveal that Moshe would die? And the answer is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was afraid, and Kolev for sure, following in God's footsteps, that the people would imagine that Moshe Rabbeinu is a divine source of power. He's an Ish Elokim. They may come to a mistake. Ki hu ha'mesavev me'arachos u'meshadadam. The Nevuah said Moshe Meis. The Nevuah was telling the people that God had promised that they would inherit the land. That promise was not conditional and dependent upon Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu will die. Again, that could change. But right now, the way I see it, God says, if Moshe Rabbeinu will continue, the people will believe in Moshe Rabbeinu, that he controls all the marochos, all the constellations, all the natural systems. And lahotzi mi liba mi toyosa. What Moshe Mess, that Nevuah, is trying to teach them, don't think that it's all dependent on Moshe, that he's the source of all these great powers, that he controls the world. And in fact, there was a great fear that in the next generation, the children, having been brought up on all the history of Moshe Rabbeinu and his role, they might have come to the conclusion, mistakenly, that Moshe is the original source and power, and the miracles come from him. Therefore, when Yoshua enters into the land, he tells the people there's a Kel Chai, and the source of all miracles, and the omnipotent being that controls everything is none other than Kel Chai. It's not Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu is gone. Therefore, says Rav Meir Simcha, Omrim, Yoshua could not join with Kalev in this statement. He would have to wait till his day would come to say the words Olo now. Now, at this point, I'd like to take a break for questions before we go on. If you have the Chumash open, please turn to the very next pasuk, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, and we'll see an amazing chiddush of Rav Meir Simcha. So if anybody now could press the unmute button, which is on the bottom, I think, of your screen.
Hi, Rav Berzon.
Yes.
What we learned from this is that when someone gets Ruach HaKodesh, he doesn't necessarily get told everything. I'm trying to remember what specific.
I would say he gets told whatever he needs to know, whatever the divine being wants him to know. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't remember now what point you said triggered that, but
yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. Let's read Pasuk Lamed Aleph. And once again, Rav Meir Simcha points our attention to a strange word and its grammatical conjugation. So in Perek Yud Gimel, and we're looking at Pasuk Lamed Aleph. V'anoshim asher olu imo, the balance of the Ralgim, the other 10, Amru, they declared, Lo nuchal lalos el ha'am, ki chazaku mimenu. The extra word mimenu, and it's written in the plural, catches the eye. Says Rav Meir Simcha Yitochen, we're familiar with that word. Whenever he used the word Yitochen, it is possible. It means, listen up. He Amru. They understood a deep psychological principle. He derech ha'ish hamagudol b'shiflus haruach u'bachna v'avdus parach. It's natural on a psychological level to understand that a person who's brought up as a low being, he is put down, as the Jewish people were in this entire generation, with a generation that left Mitzrayim. They will not have that powerful spirit that will give them the confidence to go battle against another nation, let alone such a powerful nation. And 7 of them, these are people who experienced shiflus and avdus. They wouldn't have the romamus hanefesh, that courage that's necessary to muster up the energy to fight this battle. And therefore, as the Ibn Ezra points out in Parshas Shelach, way back when they left Mitzrayim, V'lo Nocham Elokim, God took them the roundabout way. Derech Eretz Plishtim Berosa Milchama V'Shavu Mitzrayim, says the Ibn Ezra, that these were Avodim Hachas Yad Acherim. V'hinei kasher yotza paro achreim ein b'hem merim yad. When they left Paro, they could not even lift an arm to fight against Paro. They were totally passive. And it was the divine being, miraculously, that would fight the battle against Mitzrayim. Where were the Jews? There were millions of them, probably 3 million strong. They couldn't stand up against Mitzrayim, says the Ibn Ezra. They didn't have that power psychologically to play a proactive role. They were so used to shiftless, to being passive. And the same is true with regard to the generation just a short while later that is going to check out the land of Israel and see if we can conquer the land. It was not a people, this was not a generation having experienced such extreme affliction, subjugation, with a state of being inferior, seeing themselves as chagovim, as grasshoppers. They could not possibly muster up the energy to fight this battle. L'chein amru, ki milchamos atzumas ke'elu. These kinds of tremendous military campaigns, bal yeus, it's not appropriate, l'dorenu, for our generation. We are the generation of slaves. We are the inferior generation that suffers so much from an inferior complex of passivity. And often when I read these words, it brings tears to my eyes because I think of all our ancestors not long ago going through the concentration camps. And there were uprisings, Baruch Hashem. We have a lot to be proud of. But more often than not, we did not raise a voice and gather our energies against this powerful force called the Nazim Yimach Shemam. Says Rabbi Simcha, a chiddush. What they were saying, the Meraglim, was that although our generation doesn't have the psychological energy to be motivated to rise up and fight the battle against these giants, but lebanenu, what about our next generation? What about our children? Shehem megudolim below shiflus ubelow avavdus. There's a new generation coming up. We all believe in the next generation, the younger people. This was so true of the people who came after the war, after World War II, to the land of Israel. And they said, let's raise a new generation of Israelis that will go out and fight the battles. But Nenu, they will be able to muster up that energy, that force, and be motivated to fight this battle. Lochein Omar, that's what they said. Ki chazaku mimenu. They added the word mimenu from us. Mimenu velo mibanenu. Could you imagine Rav Simcha in the 20th century is creating a droshas chazal? Very often we have a pasuk, this but not that, right? A drosha that says this to exclusion of that. Who would believe in the 20th century a giant would come along and make up his own droshas? And that's exactly what we have here. Rav Simcha says, mimenu velo mibanenu, implying that this nation and the 7 nations of Akbar, they are stronger than us, but not that our children. And Rabbosai, if you accept the thesis of Rav Simcha, it really puts the entire sin of the Meraglim in a different perspective. Because the great chiddush here is that the Meraglim did not give up on conquering the land and inheriting it. They had absolute commitment and faith and belief in the divine promise. We will inherit the private land, but not we, not our generation. We cannot muster up the energy, but our children, the next generation, raised in freedom, as Israelis, they will be able to conquer the world. Absolutely amazing chiddush based on one word that seems superfluous in the pasuk. Let's fast forward to pasuk Yud Ches, here in the same parsha. So we're just jumping forward by 4 psukim, and it says the following. Oh, I'm sorry. We're now in Perek Yud Dalet. Did I mention that? I think I forgot to mention that we have to fast forward to Perek Yud Dalet, and we're looking at Pasuk Yud Ches. Moshe Rabbeinu realizes that it's a critical hour. The sin of the Meraglim is way too severe. When the people questioned their ability to conquer the land, they were in effect undermining the entire program and the divine program, which Moshe Rabbeinu was meant to lead the people into the land. And he prays. And in his prayer, he uses almost identical words to that which back at Chet HaEgel, Hashem taught him in Parshas Ki Tisa, the Yud Gimel Midos Harachim. Hashem erech hapayim v'rav chesed nosei avon v'fesha nakei lo yanakei poked avon. I mean, this is a repeat, almost word for word. Says Rabbi Simcha, but if you read the pasuk carefully, there's one word at the beginning of this pasuk that's missing, that we only have back at the Egel in Parshas Ki Tisa, and that's the name of God. Because in Parshas Ki Tisa, the Yud Gimel Midas Arachmim open with the name of God times 2, Hashem Hashem Kel Rachum V'Chanim. And here it's omitted. Says Rabbi Simcha, let's open up the Gemara in Meshech Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara tells us exactly why there are two midos that are identical, Hashem Hashem, the name of God times 2, which form 2 out of the 13 midos arach. Rabbi Yochanan first describes God teaching the Yud Gimel midos arachim to Moshe Rabbeinu l'wali bikra kosav yashal yomer malamed shnisati v'kodesh baruch hu v'shliach tzibur v'herlo l'Moshe seder tefillah. Moshe Rabbeinu learns from Hashem. Hashem is the shliach tzibur. He wraps himself kaviyachol in a talis. And as a shliach tzibur, he shows Moshe Rabbeinu the Seder Tefillah, Hashem Hashem Kel Rachum V'Chanun, and he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Kol Zman Yisrael Chotim, Yasu Lefanai Keseder Azev Ani Mochelachem. This is the secret prayer, what we call Slichot, which was taught to Moshe by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Now's the right moment to use that teaching. And the Gemara continues, Hashem Hashem, Ani Hashem kodem hachet, v'ani Hashem li'achar. God is the God before man sins, and God will have compassion even after man sins. And Rabbi Simcha asks the obvious question: why do I need the divine compassion of Yud Kei Vav Kei before the sin? That seems totally unnecessary. Says Rabbi Simcha, quoting the Russian Masechta Avodah Zarah, there are two parts to sin. First is machshava. A man decides that he's going to sin, he begins to plan and scheme, and then there's a ma'isa, and then there's the action. We have a principle, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref machshava k'ma'isa. Even if a person is planning a sin, he will not be held liable for that machshava. But, says the Rosh, is one sin of all the 613 precepts, which is exceptional. And as an exception to the rule, man is considered a sinner at the very moment that he has the machshava. And that's the sin of avodah zarah, of idol. The very moment the thought crosses man's mind to worship an idol, he's guilty of the sin of avodah zarah, because that sin of idol worship is b'machshava, is in the mind. And here HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ani Hashem kodem achet. What do you mean kodem achet? I don't need divine compassion before the sin. I haven't implemented the sin. Machshava is not mitzaref l'maisa. Oh, you know what Ani Hashem kodem achet is, says the Rosh? It's the chet of avodah zarah. Who would know about this Rosh? Tucked away at the end of Masechta Avodah Zarah. except for a gadol like Rabbi Simcha. And who would be so ingenious as to use the rush to answer the discrepancy between Kitisa, the Yud Gimel Midos, and Parshas. In Parshas Kitisa, we're dealing with the sin of Avodah Zarah. And now I need Hashem Kodem Achet. I need God to be with me even before I implement the sin, because I'm already guilty for the machshava. And already at that point, I am in desperate need of the divine being close to me, not ignoring me, not alienating. But here, in Parshas Shelach, we're not dealing with the chet of Avodah Zarah. And therefore, all we need is Ani Hashem li'achar chet. The sin of the Meraglim is not the sin of the Egan. And let's go on to another part of this very same pasuk. And the pasuk says, Rav Chesed. God, you're great in compassion. Once again, Rabbi Simcha quotes a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara says, no say avon v'over al pesha, quoting a pasuk at the end of Tanakh. Lemino say avon, lemisha over al pesha. To whom does God forgive? To someone who is over al pesha. And that's how the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah interprets the words Rav Chesed. God has a tremendous, powerful chesed, a profound and extreme chesed for someone who is over al pesha. Who is the person who's over al pesha? And here the Gemara relates a story to illustrate what it means to be over al pesha. Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, Chalash, he became very weak. All Rav Papa l'shiyulei. Rav Papa comes in to visit him and to see what's going on. Hazi de Cholish le Alm. Rav Papa realizes that Rav Huna is breathing his last breaths on this earth. Amar lahu. Immediately, Rav Papa turns to the people with the words Tzvisule Zarvasda. Rashi says, prepare the tachrichim. We're going to be burying Rav Huna very short. With Sof, but at the end, Istap. Miraculously. Rav Huna brayed Rav Yeshua as a comeback. And I always say, this happened recently with my mother-in-law. They questioned about ventilator, not a ventilator. And we said, if need be, Baruch Hashem, at the very last moment, she didn't need a ventilator. Miracle of miracles. My father-in-law did not get that miracle. And she's now back there. I mean, she's not in her full strength because she has other issues, but Baruch Hashem. So there are miracles. And when the doctors tell you, forget about ventilators, don't rely on them. Quote this Gemara Rosh Hashanah about Rav Huda Breder Rav Yeshua. Havi michzak Rav Papa lemichze. Rav Papa avoided Rav Huda. He didn't want to see him. He was embarrassed because he was the one who signed the death warrant and said, prepare the tachricha. Amalei. So Rav Papa finally shows up and he asks Rav Huna, my chazis, you were on the verge of death. You know, we have these books that are written about near-death experiences. What did you see before you came back to this world for a second round? Amalahu, in Hachi Havi, I want to tell you that it's true that I was closer to the other side. And up in Shamayim, the Beis Din Shalmala had decided that I would be condemned to death. But Amalu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to the angels, the celestial angels, the prosecuting attorneys, Hoil v'lo mukim milse. Therefore, lo takumu bahadi. Lo takumu bahadi means don't take his life. And why? Because, quote, lo mukim b'milse. So Rashi tries to interpret this Gemara those three words, lo mukim b'milse. And Rashi says, Eino mamid al midosa, which means that when a person is insulted, he has a natural knee-jerk response. He wants to shoot back, and Rav Huna does not do so. But my personal take on this is that Rameir Simcha felt that Rashi was stretching it a little bit, because what is lo mukim b'milse? I mean, lo mukim b'milse means he doesn't stand for his words. And Rashi says he doesn't shoot back when he's insulted. He's mavir al midosa. Inyan says Rameir Simcha, with all due respect to Rashi, I think I have shot in lo mukim l'milse. Inyan. And he quotes a Gemara in Sota. The Gemara in Sota says that there's a machlokes between two Amoraim as to whether or not a Talmud Chacham is allowed a shminish shebeshminish shebegaiva, 1/8 of an eighth of gaiva, 1/64. And one opinion says yes, gaiva 1/64%, a fraction, that's appropriate for a Talmud Chacham, because otherwise people, the Amaratzim, will take advantage of him, they'll insult him. And there's another Mandi Omar who's not willing to say that mutal is gayas ktsas, there's no gaiva, and completely rejects this idea of gaiva, even for a Talmud Chacham. Who is it in the Gemara in Sota that maintain the position that Chacham tzarech lizgos ktsas? Take a look, says Rameir Simcha. And I would say, hold on to your chairs. It's none other than Rav Huna Breid Rab Yoshua. Rav Huna Breid Rab Yoshua says that a Talmud Chacham has to be a little bit of a Balgaiva, because otherwise they're going to cut him down, they're going to insult him, and Kavod HaTorah is at stake. He should be a Balgaiva 1/64. That's the sheet of Rav Huna Breid Rab Yoshua. And who is the person who tells us that he was in a near-death situation? He was up there being condemned by the angels in the Bezdin Shel Mala, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervened on his behalf. That's Rabbi Yeshua Breid Rabbi. That's Rav Huda Breid Rabbi Yeshua. The same individual says that a Talmud Chacham tzarich lizgaos ktsas. Says Rabbi Simcha. Now we have a whole new pshat in the words that the Gemara codifies here in the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hoyel v'lo mukim b'milse. Lo mukim b'milse means he doesn't follow his own words. He himself says that a Talmud Chacham would wave the flag of Gaiva. And yet, if anyone insulted him, Rav Huna Breid Rabbi Yeshua was Mavir al Midosa. Of all people, the last person on the face of the earth who should be a Mavir al Midosa, who could reach that Madrega, is Rav Huna Breid Rabbi Yeshua, because he's the one who said Shmini Gaiva, that about Talmud Chacham has to be shtatz. He has to have stalts. He should not be insulted. But no, he says, he was the one who was Mavir al Midosa. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Hoil v'lo mukim b'milse. He doesn't follow his own prescription, his own recommendation, in order to be an honor. He overcomes that. Not only as you and I would have a natural sense of shooting back. We don't want to turn the other cheek. We want to shoot back for those who insult us and to overcome that temptation. But moreover, to break with his own milse, his own shita, that's amazing. And here we see a case of Rameir Simcha, who offers his own pshat as a substitute for that of Rashi in a Gemara. I can't begin to tell you how excited I am about the originality. I mean, I come from a school of thought where originality is everything. I'm not saying that I can live up to that, but Rameir Simcha certainly did. Every paragraph from Rameir Simcha challenges us to reveal the concealed creativity and insight of Rameir Simcha. And finally, to let you go, with one last point. Here, in the same parak Yudalid, and in the very same pasuk, pasuk Lamed He. Just 1 second. No, actually, it's is it the same pasuk that we just did? I can just want to get myself oriented. No. That pasuk was pasuk Yudches. So let's just fast forward quickly. I don't want to keep you too long to pasuk Lamed He. Now, Reb Meir Simcha has a lot of chidushim here on this pasuk. I'm just going to mention one of them. If we had more time, we would go through others. The pasuk says, pasuk Lamed He. Again, the last part of the pasuk, because we're short on time. Bamidbar hazeh yitamu v'sham yomusu. Reb Meir Simcha is bothered by two questions here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is already giving the decree that this generation of the Meraglim will die, will perish. And that's called Bamidbar Hazeh, they will die here in the Midbar. And that's Yitam. But then two other words, Visham Yamusa. First of all, the two words are totally superfluous. And secondly, why change the language from Hazeh Yitamu to Sham Yamusa? Reb Meir Simcha, with a brilliant insight, says the following, that these two phrases are referring to two different things. And quoting Rabbeinu Tam in Baba Basra, there were 15,000 Jews, plus a little, that did not die in the Midbar from that generation. And on that very last Tisha B'Av, the 40th year of the Midbar, they got up from their graves and they were alive and they entered into the land of Israel. Says Reb Meir Simcha, let's calculate. 15,000 going into 600,000 is 1 over 40, meaning 40 times 15 is 600. And the significance of 1/40th is Ayin Yofa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had an Ayin Yofa. The Gemara says about someone who wants to give Truma, be Ayin Yofa. He's very magnanimous about his gift to the Kohen. He gives more than 2%, 1 over 40. And therefore, the Gzera was Visham Yamus, that the bulk of the people, minus 1 over 40, would die Sham in the Midbar. And I'm sorry, Bamidbar Hazeh Yitam. Sorry, Bamidbar Hazeh Yitam. So those 39 out of 40 percentage would die where? Bamidbar Hazeh Yitam. What's Visham, youngs? The word Visham means out of the Midbar. Visham means in Eretz Yisrael. And that's a reference to the 1 over 40 that would die after crossing the Yarden. What was their status? Why were they spared? Were they great tzaddikim? And we only know of Kalev and Yoshua. Says Reb Meir Simcha, there were 3 levels in Klal Yisrael. There were the real wicked ones. Unfortunately, the bulk of Klal Yisrael, they gave up hope. No divine promise, it's not going to happen. It was Kalev and Yoshua on the other polar extreme. They were absolutely committed. Let's go in now, Olo now. In the middle, there was a very small group making up 15,000 Jews, 1 over 40, who was sort of like on the fence. They were between the 2 polar extremes. They didn't know what to say. To some extent, they were guilty, but not on the same level. Therefore, Rabbi Simcha, quoting an amazing Chazal, a medrash that we don't know about, says that when did these people die, the 15,000 that got up on that very last Tisha B'Av? They died during the 7 years of what's called kibush. You know, there were first Yoshua had 7 years of kibush and then 7 years of chiluk. Chiluk means when every person, each Tachas Gafno, would get his Chiluk in Eretz Yisrael. These 15,000 plus survived. They crossed the Yarden. They may have participated in the battles, but unfortunately, these 15,000 people would not see a Yishuv to live in domicile and get their Chelek in the land of Israel. They would enter the land, but they would not settle the land. They would perish during those first 7 years. Says Rameir Simcha, that's Visham Yanus. Visham, they will enter the land. Not like the Tamu Bamidbar Azeh. They deserve a little bit more credit. But Sham Yanusu, Yamusu means Velo Yisyashvu. They will not be Zocher to settle in the land. They did not love the land enough, as Kalev and Yoshua did, and therefore they would not inherit the land. They would be part of the military campaign, but they would cross the Midbar. They would cross from the Midbar over to the land. Okay, Rav Osai, I think we covered a lot. I wish I had time to just review all the things that we did, the many, many chidushim, and we didn't even cover a quarter. I don't even know if we covered 10% of Parshas Shelach. We just started the parsha, we got so involved, and we couldn't go beyond. So let me take
Thank you very much.
Everyone, Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much, Rav Berzon.
Yeah,
Not
thank
even
you
one
so
in-
much. I
Not
hope
even
you got
1 in
something out of
40.
it. A lot of insights to Rav Meir. Incredible.
Yeah, a great scale.
Relative. Thank you so much.